Welcome to the C3S 10th anniversary commemorative event, the two-day international seminar on trends and transformations in China's geopolitics, strategy, society and business. Sir R.S. Vasan, Indian Navy retired, to kindly deliver the welcome address. A brief on studies.
Very good morning to all of you. Honorable Raksha Mantri, Srimati China Studies, Ambassador Ganapati, Member C3S, Professor Narayan. Note that coincidentally, we did not plan it this way. The CEO summit is happening tomorrow onwards. It is not that we planned for this, so it one leads to another, and therefore the deliberations in the next 2 days, tomorrow and day after. We have wonderful people who have come from all over. Let me extend a very hearty welcome to the Nirmala seetharaman. She will be introduced subsequently by Asma Masood. But Madam, personally I am very grateful to you for this gesture, very kind gesture, that you are able to readjust your schedule and be here with us. It means a lot to us in terms of our own activities. Ambassador Ganapati has joined us recently. He brings to the table his rich experience from the foreign ministry. He has held important portfolios in different continents and different.
Minister of Defence Srimati Nirmala Seetharaman to kindly light the lamp. I request Ambassador M. Ganapati, Member C3S, to present the book. And I now request Kumoda Vasan, Director C3S, to gift the dignitary with a memento. Chennai. Sri B.S. Raghavan sir, may I request you to in 1975. He was Consul General of India, Sydney, 2001 to 2005. Kindly settle down. Authors to kindly come forward to receive the first copies from the Honorable Minister of Defence. The authors Ms. Nappanai Damodaran, Ms. Krita and Ms. Akanshka Soni. I request the dignitary to of India. May I now request her to kindly address the gathering.
It's an honor that I've been invited to be here, especially when you're holding, along with the National Maritime Studies, a two-day interaction and also a seminar, I understand. To address you in this context makes me feel extremely honored. A gathering of scholars at a time when the global landscape, global geopolitical, geostrategic landscape is in a churn. It's very easy, of course, to say It's no longer bipolar, it is no longer unipolar, and then start talking about various options. But yes, it is a time of churn, and at a time when China is emerging, the description of how China is emerging, what are the kind of strengths it has shown, where is it in the global economy, where is it in the global political arena, and so on, has already been very nicely described. But before I get into some of the details of what I would like to say to you, I think the idea of having a center outside of Delhi, a think tank outside of Delhi, a think tank which, as I was very pleased to hear, which I've also read earlier, has attained a certain global recognition and ranking, a think tank which is able to draw global scholars, and a think tank which is so focused, particularly on a country, as the ambassador very beautifully described, a complex country, and not a very transparent country. That's not my judgment, but it is an observation which many scholars have come to agree on. A country whose political system is not as defined by any of us about any other country elsewhere. You will say, oh, this is open democracy, oh, that's a very closed whatever. But here is a country which is probably a blend of several things. So for a center outside of the national capital to be focused on a very important country, a country with whom we share a very long international border, a country with whom, as was rightly pointed out, our economy draws so much, aspires to give so much. A center, a think tank, if it is focused on a country of that nature, you can understand the criticality of supporting such a center. We need such think tanks. Welcome if they are outside of Delhi, and here is a center which easily energizes the narrative which has the peninsular focus, south of India focus. That's a very catchy narrative in India, particularly when you're standing somewhere in the south. But when you're looking at think tanks, there is strength in the argument that you need a center south of India, so need a center of that stature with a peninsular perspective for a country which shares a border with this big neighbor. And therefore I give my words of commiseration, great sense of appreciation that it has had a successful 10-year tenure, and I'm sure you will have a bright several more decades. The Government of India, because I've had interaction with the MEA, Ministry of External Affairs, talking about this center, the MEA's representatives have also had a great sense of appreciation for the work which is going on here. So I'm here amidst you all, for whom Government of India has a great respect and looks forward to hearing your views. And before I get into the actual topic, I take this opportunity, even though I was a bit overwhelmed, and I don't want to use the word embarrassed, but I was indeed, for the copious praise that the patron Sri Raghavan has had for me. He's always been encouraging me. I'm grateful for that. That motivates me nevertheless. But even as I say that, I also would want to just recall that the founder, P.S. Raman, much before I became a minister, also has shared a few such words with me, and I recall that with a great fondness. It was not a very happy moment when all of a suddenly we heard about his demise, but I take this opportunity to pay my respects to him and the respect with which I held him for the excellent work that he had done prior to his retirement. So with all that said, I want to just talk about the China related matters. As I said, we are talking about China at a time when there is a great churn. Geostrategical, geopolitical matters are all available for every country to have its own perspective. India, particularly after 2014, with the energy that the Prime Minister has invested in building in India's external affairs, India's strategic thinking, attempt to position India not as a regional power, as a power which is growing in its stature, probably as a power which probably, for whatever reason, has been kept in the sidelines in many of the high tables of the global negotiations, has taken every step possible to bring India to the fore. He has not hesitated to push the frontier further every time, as you would know. Every visit that he has undertaken was, of course, to draw investment from those countries, but equally to project the Indian strength, whether it is in your manufacturing, whether it is in your agriculture, or whether it is in the soft power that India would hold, being a cultural leader, particularly when you're talking of the spread of Buddhism from India, from the way ancient kings, the Cholas in particular, who spread into the Southeast Asian nations and so on. So when he knew, and I suppose that's the way in which India's strengths were taken forward to various countries, each according to the strength that we had, whether it is of this millennia or of earlier millennia. So he has not hesitated to speak about India's strength then, as much as he would speak of India's strength today, whether it is in IT or whether globally, whether we in India recognized it or not. India had brand value for its Ayurveda, brand value for its yoga, brand value for the experts that Indian services provided, whether you're nurses, whether you're chartered accountants, whether you're doctors. So there was no stone unturned, as you probably would say. But under Modi, that's been, if you notice, the tactic with which he took India globally. And as a result, within the 4 years, you've had India recognized in the sense it was unsaid but was recognized earlier, but was there a recognition to brand it with India, to take India, when you talk about geopolitics, to take all these also as a strength of India? Not so much copying what China has done, but matter of fact, when you look at China, when over the decades China projected itself for the strength of its economy, the kind of language, the ancient culture, the kingdoms that have been, and so on, for its herbal medicine. So many things also together made what you would have understood of China, but India, for instance. And this is not really getting into a easy narrative, but matter of fact, India, for instance, would have gone with a narrative which is, it's all right you produce great engineers, it's all right you produce wonderful doctors, it's all right all over the world. Brain drain happening in India has benefited the rest of the world and so on, but why is there poverty in your country? You wouldn't probably ever deny this. So you would have that kind of an identification. I'm sure when you're talking about China, even today there are parts of China, regions within real China, some pockets within China which do have developmental indicators which are not as good as that which you would see in Shanghai or Guangzhou or Beijing. But that successfully they overcame over the decades and were able to promote an image of their country as a growing power. So that is one thing which the Prime Minister definitely wanted to break that mold and take India for its strength wherever he went. As a result, today you have India being seen as a emerging power, but not a regional power anymore. You are able to talk about Wassenaar, you are able to talk about MTCR, you are able to go to the UN to say what you think in terms of world's counter-terrorism efforts will have to be. You are able to contribute, you are an important partner in terms of sharing intelligence which is required to take care of global strategies for terrorism, countering terrorism and so on. Now, if that is one angle, the other is recognition also, not just from one country, of how India is now at the center of a whole lot of developments globally. The fact that we kept saying India, look east, act east, and also started speaking about Indian Ocean. Today we've understood that we are a key player in the Indo-Pacific. And I might be probably jumping a bit away from the platform that I'm creating, but to say the narrative when you're talking of budget for the armed forces, I am also seeing that the need for greater support for our maritime adventures not in that sense, maritime activities, whether it is your HADR, whether it is your SAR activities, it's no longer just your Indian Ocean waters. You're going further. Like as I'm talking today, you have our fleet, some of our ships which are in Guam, participating in some exercise. Only recently we were in Vietnam. So your look east, act east, your Indian Ocean, your Southeast Asia is now stretching further to the extent that, however you may call it symbolic, the US command, which was the Pacific Command, is Indo-Pacific Command. In a way, it tells me the centrality of India in this whole process. The role that India will have to play in the Indo-Pacific region is what is getting underlined. And therefore, I see that at a time when you're looking at, in fact, there are times when I was, initial days when I took a lot of briefing from non-ministerial, non-force related, headquarters related outsiders who were coming and talking to me. Outsiders, experts who live civil lives, who came and talked to me. There was once somebody who did say that it's all right in India, we look at the hills, we look at the Himalayas, we look at the desert borders, naturally because you have our neighbors with whom you have a very sometimes challenging relationship. And this person once turned the map around and showed it to me. Now you're Raksha Mantri, would you also want to turn 180 degrees and see from where you are to the seas that are below us, the extent of the water and the activities which are happening there. 40% of your trade, your crude, your this, and 40% not just of your trade but also trade of China passes through these waters. What does that strategically imply to you? Are you looking at dealing with that? And that's exactly where, much to our notice, and we do take cognizance of it, a lot of activities have been happening. It's not as if it's for the first time. The entire narrative of the string of pearls also emerged from there. So India's position today is very clearly not just dealing with the northern borders, in many places which is not so defined, the western borders which is defined but where you have issue almost every day, but this whole stretch of the water through which, whether you're containing piracy in the maritime terrain, or whether you're looking at Malacca, whether you're looking at Sunda, or whether you're looking at further Indonesia, the importance of or the presence of very many other forces which you have to take into your cognizance is what we are repeatedly doing in the ministry. And when we are talking of all these, like the way it was rightly referred, post-October 2017, we are looking at a different China where the leadership has done quite a lot in terms of internal restructuring. Slightly before that, we had quite a lot of conversation of how the Chinese economy, moving away from an export-driven economy, was looking at a consumption-driven economy, and therefore the nature of industry was all being absolutely revamped. A structural adjustment within China for looking at an economy which had maximum derived its strength from export-driven activities was now at a position, probably comfortably placed, strongly placed, to be able to get that changed, have the industries refocus on domestic market. So there was this whole structural reshuffle or restructuring happening of the industries in China, which would probably place less weight on exports but look at greater importance of domestic consumption. That was happening. Simultaneously, we heard about how the yuan was aspiring to become a global currency. Till today, all of us are aware, and many monetary experts would say how. The position of a currency of international exchange would still be with the dollar, less with the pound. But you started realizing that the aspirations of the Chinese was to make the yuan, the renminbi, to become an international currency, and therefore there was also the speculation at one point in time that the undervaluing currency valuation related decisions which China had taken, all within a month, I think about 3 times the currency was devalued. These were very much well before October 2017. So the revamping, structurally changing of the economy and its driving forces and its priorities took a top agenda before October 17 in China. But post 17, we know that there is a lot of rationalizing of the armed forces. Rationalizing of the armed forces in China to make it a far more lean and mean machine, to make it a machine which will depend more on technology than on manpower, restructuring to make it far more theater driven rather than border area north, south, east, west driven, are all happening. The current restructuring and modernization of the PLA itself, as I said, involves joint theaterization, reorganization of the Central Military Commission, the CMC as they call it, and the raising of PLA rocket forces, the PLARF, PLA Strategic Support Force, as well as conversion of its existing forces into a combined arms brigade, are all majorly noticed. The global community is watching them. These have happened, probably started earlier, but post October 17. Newer technologies are being infused. There's just no doubt about it. Newer technologies, whether it relate to weapon and weapon systems, are all coming into its inventory. The reduction of the troops that I've talked about, I think it's reduced it to about 3 lakhs post the reforms. And therefore then, as a natural corollary, you will only see more money, more resources being spent on infrastructure and technological development. Needless to say, I'm standing in a think tank. We'll certainly take a cue from it. Even as I say that there is a structural readjustment of its armed forces, the way in which resources are being spent, it's not like the economy where we spoke about not export driven, but it's going to be looking inward, make it far more consumption driven. Now these reforms which are happening about its armed forces, these reforms which is happening about reduction in its forces, the manpower, these reforms which wherein you're able to now divert a bit of your resources towards advancement in technology, whilst that is happening, there is no letting up in terms of its external forays. The recent Djibouti base that they've started in the Horn of Africa does highlight that whilst the economy still depends a lot on exports, however they have reshifted their focus into consumption driven, their activity externally is as was before or more strengthened. Now perhaps, as was rightly observed, it's not just strategic for strategic, but strategic through economic too. The kind of economic assistance being extended to many of our neighbors, many of the island nations, are all very clearly impacting the economies there, probably helping to bond the relationship with those countries. As a result, even strategic presence could be enabled. What happens to the economic burden which may result in terms of servicing of those loans is a different issue altogether. But I see a linkage. You are able to build a bond through your economic assistance. And that probably matures into a strategic relationship, post which it could be a different ballgame where you will wonder if this economic relationship itself is serviceable, maintainable, continuable, extendable further. This is something which I think all of us will have to, you as think tank, we as government will have to constantly be alert to and understand its ramifications. The focus of the reforms, I'm not, I suppose, giving what the think tank will have to tell me, but at the same time, I also want to make sure that I lay before you some of these thoughts to just assure you that the ministry is equally observing, learning, understanding the dynamic changes that are happening. And therefore, I'm leaving this before you, nothing so much as to say, look, we know so much, what can you give? Not at all. Just give you an assurance that we are looking at different layers of information, taking them on board, making them part of what our process of decision making is. The focus of reforms, therefore, is evidently moving towards the PLA Navy, PLA Air Force, and the PLA, as I said, rocket forces, as opposed to the erstwhile emphasis on just the PLA. Now it's really structured, layered, and going down to specifics. And therefore it is important for Indian think tanks to understand where this is going to crystallize and how are we constantly going to be ready with the response. Now, even as I said about the external presence, took the example of Djibouti. For us in India, the elephant in the room, as you would say, is the CPEC. the China-Pakistan Economic Cooperation Corridor. We've very clearly stated our position there. It's an issue of sovereignty and we shall not entertain any thoughts on that matter. There's been complete and I think increased dependency of Pak military on Chinese arms and equipment. A fundamental reorientation of the China-Pakistan relations is not likely. However, the relationship is really getting intense. But one thing I want to assure here is we do not view our relations with China through the prism of China-Pakistan relations. We certainly do not view our relationship with China through the prism of China-Pakistan relationship. There are increased transgressions across our perception of the LAC by the PLA troops, and that results in every now and then news about face-offs. And that's been now probably a discernible pattern that is emerging in the northern borders for us. However, I think I would lay emphasis on the fact that there is a greater engagement of India with China. India's participation in the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation countries, is definitely giving us greater opportunity for engagement, and engagement itself, therefore, can be one of the very strong ways in which relationship can be bettered. It's not going to be something for want of engagement. The borders are hot or the borders are cold or whatever. There is enough and more opportunities, platforms available for us to constantly engage with China. And India enjoys excellent bilateral relations also with other members of the SCO. We have bilateral cooperation with many of them, and therefore the relationship with China in particular through the SCO has seen a lot of reinvigoration. The mechanisms which are existing, whether it's your border personal meet, the dispute redressal meets, the crisis management study group meets, the NDC in India and the PLA in China are all, PLA's NDU in China are all actively every now and then engaging. And it's a very important necessity to this relationship, this engagement through these various existing mechanisms are kept active for confidence building. And with that said, I think I will give a minute to what the ambassador rightly said. It's been the Prime Minister's USP in forging a personal level relationship with the Chinese leaders, particularly with the President of China, as was seen even with the President of Russia. He's now made a very vigorous engagement possible even in an informal meet. The Chinese leadership themselves very clearly mentioned that for the first time in China's history, twice, not just once, for the same leader from the same country, the Chinese leadership agreed to welcome him outside of Beijing. Outside of Beijing, this time in Wuhan, the President having an informal meeting with our Prime Minister. And not just one meeting in the morning or the next meeting in the next day, it was like through the day engagement, breakfast meeting, meeting during lunch, but meeting at a different site where I think once you are out of that room, which is a formal engagement room, delegation level meeting room, a lot of possibilities emerge. The Prime Minister, by having this informal engagement, which the Chinese President gave all the time, 2 full days of engagement. People constantly say, what is this informal? It's never been so. Why not now? Why should it be now, and so on? But I would put it before you that this long-term engagement, this informal engagement, and just not one-off meeting, but consistent flowing through the day for 2 days engagement, will have some outcome in the short term, but without doubt, in the long term, the relationship between India and China will immensely benefit from this engagement. At our levels, of course, when we've talked with our counterpart, my senior colleague, Honorable Sushma Swaraj, also in the SCO summit, engaged with the External Affairs Minister of China. I was there, along with the other SCO members. In our bilaterals, several issues in the light of post-Doklam kind of a era, we have engaged and asked for. I have requested them that there should be a greater interactive forum. We should have definitely a hotline between India and China, so that if there are situations like the ones which we faced, where of course lots of different level of engagements have happened over the months, 72 days if I do know right, a hotline would definitely reduce the time consumed in reaching the empowered decision makers when there is a crisis at the ground level. We have certainly underlined the fact that the border personnel meets, the flag officers meets, and all that can happen, but we need to have that hotline, because that would easily, sooner, within a short time, help us in being ready for a resolution. So that is one of the things that I have highlighted, but I'm sure there are many others which are happening. I wouldn't want to burden you with more of what we are doing. It's a time when I wish this 10-year institution, which has contributed already greatly towards understanding China better, does well and continues its good work. We look forward to your inputs. I wish the center a great deal of success, the Chennai Center for China Studies. It's very catchy to say C3S, but I'm more comfortable with the longish name. But thanks very much for giving me this opportunity. I'll constantly look forward to learning from you. I wish the 2-day program all success. Thank you.